My name is Harper Mitchell, and for most of my life, I've been the family disappointment. Not because I was getting into trouble or failing at school, but because I refused to follow the script my parents had written for my life before I was even old enough to hold a pencil. Growing up in Austin, Texas, in a middle-class suburban neighborhood where every house looked exactly the same, I learned early that the Mitchell family had very specific expectations for success. My father, David, was a regional manager for an insurance company who had worked his way up through 20 years of corporate ladder climbing. My mother, Linda, was a high school guidance counselor who believed there was exactly one path to a secure future: college, corporate job, marriage, house, kids, retirement. Rinse and repeat. Harper, you need to start thinking seriously about your future, my father would say every time I showed more interest in taking apart electronics than in my business classes. You can't just play with computers forever. You need a real career. A real career. In my parents' world, that meant something traditional, something they could explain to their friends at neighborhood barbecues, something safe. But even as a kid, I could see that the world was changing faster than my parents could comprehend. While they were worried about me getting good grades in subjects that felt increasingly irrelevant, I was teaching myself to code, learning about emerging technologies, and watching the early days of what would become the digital revolution. When I was 16, Bitcoin was just starting to make headlines. Most adults dismissed it as fake money or a scam, but I spent hours researching blockchain technology, understanding the mathematics behind cryptocurrency, and recognizing that this was the beginning of a fundamental shift in how the world would handle money and transactions. Harper, stop wasting time on that computer nonsense, my mother would say when she found me reading white papers about decentralized finance at EM. You have a history test tomorrow. Focus on real subjects. Real subjects. As if the technology that was about to reshape the entire global economy was somehow less real than memorizing dates of wars that happened a century ago. The real conflict started during my senior year of high school when it came time to choose a college major. My parents had already decided I would study business administration at the University of Texas, get my MBA, and then find a nice corporate job with benefits and a pension plan. We've already talked to the admissions counselor, my father announced one evening at dinner. With your grades, you'll have no problem getting into the business program. 4 years, and you'll be set for life. What if I don't want to study business? I asked. My parents exchanged that look, the one that said they were dealing with a difficult teenager who would eventually come to her senses. Harper, honey, my mother said in her guidance counselor voice, I know you think you want to do something with computers, but that's not a stable career path. Technology changes too fast. You need something solid, something that will always be in demand. But Mom, technology isn't going anywhere. It's only going to become more important. Sweetheart, my father interrupted, you're 17 years old. You don't understand how the real world works yet. Trust us, we've been around long enough to know what leads to success and what leads to disappointment. So I enrolled in the business program because fighting my parents felt harder than just going along with their plan. For 2 years, I sat through classes about traditional marketing strategies, conventional financial planning, and corporate management structures that felt like they were designed for a world that was already disappearing. Meanwhile, in my dorm room at night, I was learning Python, studying smart contracts, and watching the early stages of the fintech revolution unfold. I could see opportunities everywhere, ways that technology could make financial services more accessible, more efficient, more democratic. But every time I tried to share my excitement with my parents, they shut me down. Harper, you're getting distracted again, my mother would say during our weekly phone calls. Focus on your real classes. This computer hobby is fine as a side interest, but don't let it interfere with your education. The breaking point came during my sophomore year, when I realized I was learning more in my dorm room than in any of my business classes. The professors were teaching strategies that were already obsolete, preparing us for careers in industries that were being disrupted by the very technologies they refused to acknowledge. I made a decision that I knew would change everything. I was going to drop out of business school and transfer to a computer science program that specialized in financial technology and blockchain development. When I called my parents to tell them, the reaction was exactly what I expected, but somehow worse than I had prepared for. "You want to do WHAT?" My father shouted so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Harper, have you completely lost your mind? You're throwing away your future for some fantasy about computer games." "Dad, it's not computer games. It's financial technology. It's the future of how people will manage money, make investments, start businesses. It's a phase." My mother interrupted. "Harper, you're being a rebel just to be difficult. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision that ruins lives. You need to think about security, about stability, about having a real job that people understand." "But what if I understand something that other people don't see yet?" I asked. "Then you're probably wrong," my father said flatly. "Harper, we love you, but you're 20 years old. You think you know better than everyone else, but that's just youthful arrogance. Trust the people who have actually lived in the real world." That conversation ended with my parents giving me an ultimatum: stay in business school and keep their financial support, or pursue my computer fantasies on my own. I chose my future over their approval. The next week, I withdrew from UT's business program, enrolled in a coding bootcamp in San Francisco, and started planning a move that would either prove I was right about the future, or confirm that I was just a rebellious kid who had thrown away her life for a dream. Either way, I was about to find out who Harper Mitchell really was when she stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted her to be. The Greyhound bus from Austin to San Francisco took 36 hours, and I spent every minute of that journey questioning whether I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I had $500 in my checking account, a duffel bag full of clothes, my laptop, and absolutely no safety net. My parents had made it clear that if I was determined to throw my life away, I would be doing it without their help. "Don't come crying to us when this doesn't work out," had been my father's parting words. "We won't be here to bail you out of your poor decisions." San Francisco in 2019 was a city of extremes: billionaire tech executives walking past homeless encampments, luxury condos towering over neighborhoods where people paid $3,000 a month to Shariad Whiteward were a Quickly 500 wouldn't even cover a security deposit for the cheapest apartment I could find, but I had done my research before making the move. Through online coding communities, I had connected with other aspiring developers who were willing to let me crash on their couches while I got established. My first home was a corner of a living room in a cramped apartment in the Mission District, shared with 5 other people who were all chasing their own versions of the Silicon Valley dream. "Welcome to the struggle," said Jake, a 24-year-old from Ohio who was sleeping on an air mattress in the kitchen while working on a food delivery app. "It's not glamorous, but everyone who makes it here starts somewhere like this." During the day, I attended an intensive coding bootcamp that cost me most of my savings but promised to teach me the practical skills I needed to work in fintech. The program was brutal: 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, learning everything from advanced JavaScript to blockchain architecture to cybersecurity protocols. At night, I worked at a 24-hour diner in the financial district, serving coffee and sandwiches to late shift workers and early morning commuters. The pay was barely enough to cover my share of groceries and the occasional bus fare, but it kept me alive while I focused on learning. My parents called once a week, and every conversation followed the same pattern. "How's your little adventure going, Harper?" my mother would ask, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that really meant, "I told you so." "It's going well, Mom. I'm learning a lot, making connections in the industry." "Are you eating enough? Do you have a safe place to sleep?" "This whole thing sounds so unstable." "I'm fine. I'm exactly where I need to be." "Harper," my father would inevitably interrupt, "it's not too late to come home. Your spot in the business program is still available. You could transfer back, finish your degree, and put this whole phase behind you." Phase. They still thought this was a phase. "Dad, I'm not coming home. This isn't a phase. This is my career." Serving coffee and sleeping on strangers' couches is not a career, Harper. It's what happens when you make impulsive decisions without thinking about the consequences. But I was thinking about consequences, just different ones than my parents could imagine. While they worried about my immediate comfort and security, I was positioning myself at the center of a technological revolution that was about to transform the entire financial industry. The boot camp was intense, but I thrived in ways I never had in traditional academic settings. Instead of memorizing theories about how businesses used to work, I was learning to build the tools that would define how they would work in the future. I specialized in blockchain development and decentralized finance protocols, areas that most people still considered experimental or risky. Harper has an exceptional understanding of both the technical and practical applications of blockchain technology, wrote my instructor, Maria Rodriguez, in my final evaluation. She doesn't just code solutions, she envisions systems that don't exist yet but should. After 6 months, I completed the program and started looking for work. The job market was competitive, but my combination of financial knowledge and coding skills made me attractive to fintech startups that were trying to bridge the gap between traditional banking and emerging technologies. I landed my first job as a junior developer at a small company that was building cryptocurrency trading tools for institutional investors. The salary was modest $65,000 a year, which felt like a fortune after months of surviving on diner wages, but more importantly, I was finally working on problems that excited me. You know, said my supervisor, David Kim, during my first week. Most developers your age are focused on building the next social media app or gaming platform. It's refreshing to work with someone who understands that the real opportunity is in reimagining how money works. I moved out of the shared apartment and into a tiny studio in Soma that cost more per month than my parents' mortgage payment, but it was mine. For the first time since leaving Austin, I had my own space, my own routine, and the beginning of what felt like a real career. But I wasn't satisfied with just having a job. Every day, I saw inefficiencies in the financial system that could be solved with better technology. Traditional investment platforms were designed for people who already had money and financial knowledge. Banking services were slow, expensive, and inaccessible to millions of people who needed them most. The tools that existed for personal finance were either too simple to be useful or too complex for ordinary people to understand. I started working on my own project in the evenings and weekends, a mobile app that would make investing accessible to people who had never owned stocks before. The idea was to combine the user-friendly design of social media with the sophisticated algorithms of institutional trading platforms, creating something that could teach people about investing while helping them build wealth. You're working on what? My father asked during one of our weekly calls when I tried to explain my side project. It's an investment app for people who don't know how to invest. It uses AI to create personalized portfolios and educational content to help users understand what they're doing with their money. Harper, people who don't know how to invest shouldn't be investing. That's how they lose everything they have. But, Dad, that's exactly the problem. The current system keeps people out instead of teaching them how to participate. What if we could change that? What if you focused on doing your actual job instead of chasing another fantasy? But this wasn't a fantasy. I could see the market opportunity, the technical feasibility, and the social impact of what I was building. More importantly, I had the skills to actually build it. I just needed to prove that the rebellious kid from Austin who had thrown away her safe future actually knew what she was doing. The app was about to become my chance to do exactly that. 2 years into my San Francisco journey, I was living a double life. By day, I was Harper Mitchell, junior developer at a respectable fintech company, earning a steady paycheck and building my professional reputation. By night and on weekends, I was Harper Mitchell, solo entrepreneur, building what I believed would revolutionize how young people approached investing. My app, which I called Wealthwise, was designed to solve a problem I had experienced firsthand. Traditional investment platforms were intimidating, expensive, and designed for people who already understood financial markets. I wanted to create something that would teach users about investing while they actually invested, using small amounts of money and AI-driven guidance to build both wealth and knowledge simultaneously. The technical challenges were immense. I was essentially building 3 applications in one: a trading platform, an educational system, and a social network where users could learn from each other's experiences. I spent countless nights in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and whiteboards covered with algorithms, user flow diagrams, and financial models. "You look terrible," said my coworker Sarah during lunch one day. "Are you sleeping at all?" "I'm working on something," I admitted. "A side project that's gotten a little out of hand." "What kind of side project keeps you up until a.m. every night?" I hesitated. Even among my tech-savvy colleagues, my vision for democratizing investment still sounded overly ambitious. "I'm building an app that teaches people how to invest while they're actually investing, like Duolingo for the stock market." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds complicated and risky. What if people lose money? What if they learn how to build wealth instead of just working paycheck to paycheck for their entire lives?" It was the same conversation I had been having with my parents for 3 years, just with different people. Even in Silicon Valley, surrounded by innovation and risk-taking, most people defaulted to caution when it came to anything involving other people's money. But I had done my research. I knew that 54% of Americans owned no stocks at all, not because they didn't want to build wealth, but because they didn't know how to start or were intimidated by the complexity of traditional platforms. I knew that the average person paid hundreds of dollars in fees to financial advisors who often provided generic advice that could be automated. I knew that the tools existed to solve these problems, they just hadn't been combined in the right way yet. My parents' weekly calls had become increasingly strained as my phase stretched into its 3rd year. "Harper, we saw an article about people losing money on those cryptocurrency things," my mother said during one particularly tense conversation. "Please tell me you're not involved in anything like that." "Mom, I work in financial technology. Understanding cryptocurrency is part of my job. But you're not gambling with your own money, are you? Or encouraging other people to gamble?" "I'm building tools to help people make informed financial decisions." "That's the opposite of gambling." "Harper," my father interrupted, "we're worried about you. You've been out there for 3 years now, and what do you have to show for it? A tiny apartment that costs more than our house payment and a job that nobody back home understands. When are you going to start building a real life?" A real life. In their minds, that still meant moving back to Austin, finding a traditional job, getting married, buying a house in the suburbs, and following the same path they had followed 30 years earlier. "Dad, I am building a real life. I'm just building it differently than you did. You're building a fantasy, Harper, and fantasies don't pay for retirement or medical bills or children's college educations." But while my parents worried about my lack of traditional milestones, I was hitting milestones they couldn't even recognize. After 18 months of development, Wealthwise was ready for beta testing. I had created a platform that could analyze a user's financial situation, risk tolerance, and goals, then create a personalized investment portfolio using low-cost index funds and ETFs. The app included interactive lessons about market fundamentals, risk management, and long-term wealth building, all delivered through an interface that felt more like a game than a financial tool. I recruited 50 beta testers from online communities, mostly people in their 20s and 30s who wanted to start investing but felt overwhelmed by traditional platforms. The results exceeded my most optimistic projections. After 6 months, the average user had not only learned basic investment principles but had also seen their small portfolios grow by 12%, outperforming most actively managed mutual funds. More importantly, the users were engaged. They were logging in daily, completing educational modules, and sharing their progress with friends. I had created something that made investing feel accessible and even enjoyable. "This is incredible," wrote one beta tester in her feedback. "I've been wanting to start investing for years, but every platform I looked at made me feel stupid. Wealthwise actually teaches me what I'm doing and why. For the first time, I feel like I understand my own money." That feedback gave me the confidence to take the next step, seeking venture capital funding to scale the platform nationally. The pitch process was brutal. I spent months refining my presentation, practicing my delivery, and meeting with investors who ranged from genuinely interested to openly skeptical. Many of the older investors couldn't understand why young people needed a simplified investment platform when traditional tools already existed. "Why wouldn't they just use E-Trade or Charles Schwab?" asked one investor during a particularly challenging pitch meeting. "Because those platforms assume you already know what you're doing," I replied. "They're designed for people who understand the difference between a growth stock and a value stock, who know what an expense ratio is, who can interpret a prospectus. My users don't know those things yet, but they want to learn." "So you're targeting financially illiterate customers?" "I'm targeting financially curious customers who have been excluded from wealth-building opportunities because the existing tools are intimidating and expensive." After 6 months of pitches, rejections, and revisions, I finally found an investor who understood my vision. Jennifer Chen, a partner at a mid-sized VC firm, had built her own fintech company in the early 2000s and recognized the market opportunity I was describing. "Harper, what you've built isn't just an app," she said during our final meeting. "It's a solution to one of the biggest problems in personal finance, the knowledge gap that keeps ordinary people from building wealth. I think you're onto something significant." 3 weeks later, I signed a term sheet for $2.5 million in Series A funding. When I called my parents to share the news, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Harper," my mother finally said, "did you just say that someone gave you $2.5 million for your app?" "They invested in my company, Mom. Wealthwise is going to launch nationally next year." "But how is that possible? I thought you were just playing around with computers." For the first time in 3 years, I heard something in my parents' voices that I had been waiting for, the beginning of understanding that maybe, just maybe, their rebellious daughter had been onto something all along. 18 months after securing funding, I was standing in the Goldman Sachs boardroom in Manhattan, listening to executives discuss acquiring Wealthwise for $50 million. At 25, I was about to become one of the youngest fintech entrepreneurs to achieve a major exit. Wealthwise had grown to over 800,000 active users, with an average portfolio growth of 15% annually. We had democratized investing for an entire generation, proving that financial education and wealth building could be accessible, engaging, and profitable. "Miss Mitchell," said the Goldman Sachs managing director, "your platform has achieved something we've been trying to figure out for years: how to reach young investors effectively. We'd like to integrate Wealthwise into our consumer banking division." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same financial institutions that had ignored young investors for decades were now paying millions to acquire the solution I had built in my tiny San Francisco apartment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Harper, we just saw the Wall Street Journal article. We're so proud of you." Proud. After years of calling me a rebel, a dreamer, a kid throwing her life away, when I called them that evening, the conversation was surreal. "Harper, we had no idea you were building something so important," my father said, his voice filled with amazement. "We've been telling all the neighbors about our daughter, the tech entrepreneur. Dad, you spent 3 years telling me I was wasting my life. We couldn't see what you were seeing. We thought you were being rebellious for the sake of being rebellious." "I wasn't being rebellious, Dad. I was being right." The acquisition closed 6 weeks later. As I signed the final documents, I thought about that scared 20-year-old girl who had left Austin with $500 and a belief that the world was changing faster than anyone realized. Sometimes being called a rebel just means you're seeing the future before everyone else catches up. And sometimes, the best revenge against people who doubt you is simply proving them wrong.